If you're looking for a technical tutorial on how to use Fluentbit version 2 with metrics, traces, and logs, then this episode is for you. Welcome to Is It Observable? Today's episode is part of the Kubernetes and OpenTelemetry series, where we covered lots of various episodes. How to collect logs, what is Kubernetes, what is SCADA, how to autoscale, what is Fluentbit v2, and more. In our previous episode, we presented the new features provided by the new versions of Fluentbit. This episode will focus on providing a technical tutorial on how to use Fluentbit with metrics, traces, and logs. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So let's start by explaining our technical environment. In this tutorial, we will use Fluentbit to collect the logs from our Kubernetes cluster, but also collect metrics from various Prometheus exporter, so the kubestat metrics and node exporter. We also receive in Fluentbit all the traces and metrics produced by the OpenTelemetry demo application. We will configure the pipeline of Fluentbit to send logs, metrics, and traces to Dynatrace. For this tutorial, we will need a Kubernetes cluster as expected, the Nginx ingress controller to expose the demo application, the Prometheus operator, the OpenTelemetry operator to create a simple collector pipelines deployed as a sidecar containers in the OpenTelemetry demo. We will deploy Fluentbit, of course. We will need a Dynatrace tenant, and then we will create the right pipelines from a Fluentbit perspective and from the OpenTelemetry collector perspective.
Like every tutorials that we deliver at Is It Observable, there will always be a GitHub repository. So here you're still looking at the Fluentbit v2 tutorials to follow these various steps. Like expected, in these tutorials, there's a couple of things. So I'm not going to do the deployment, doesn't make sense for you guys, but I'm going to go through the requirements and show you what you expect. So first, you will, if you don't have any Dynatrace tenant, make sure to start a free trial. So have a new tenant for this tutorial, and then once you have your tenant, first you will have to copy the host name of your tenant. So that all the piece without HTTPS, so all the host, like I said, the host name, that will be one of the data that you will need. And the second thing that we need is to generate a token. So we're gonna go on the left menu on access token, create a new token. So here I have tons of tokens, but you can do generate one, and we are going to say ingest metrics, logs, and traces. So basically you say ingest traces, metrics, and logs. We don't do events, but those are the three ones that you will need to select. You will have to give a name, of course. If you want to do expiration date, you can do, and then you can generate and make sure to copy the value because it will display only once, because you will need it for your script. So that's why one variable for your host name and one variable for your token. So those are the two important things that you will need. Then you will have to run the scripts here that will deploy most of the things. So open the operator, Nginx ingress controller, the OpenTelemetry demo, the first instance of Fluentbit. And then before we jump to the section 5 of the pipeline, we will have to first edit the daemon set to add in the port the pod definitions a container port for OpenTelemetry, the 4318. And once it's been added, we will do the same. Make sure to edit the service Fluentbit to add also the port 4318 in for your OpenTelemetry services, because it will be utilized. Briefly, I'm going to show you in one of the files that has been deployed. It's the OpenTelemetry sidecar collector that will define where to send the telemetry data. And here you can see it's sending obviously to the Fluentbit service on the port 4318. So if the service port is not defined, you will have errors. So what do you expect from this? So if you do a kubectl, so first of all, we will see a couple of things. So Search Manager comes with the OpenTelemetry operator. We have the ingress nginx. We have the OpenTelemetry operator, and then you have the hotel demo application deployed. You have the Fluentbit namespace for the Fluentbit agents. So if you look at the default namespace, you will have all the Prometheus stack, the operator and the node exporter, the kubestate metrics deployed. If you look at the pods in namespace, you will have one pod per node of your cluster. And last thing, what you will need or see also is the pods for the Open Hotel demo. So I have in this, I could have configured directly on the pod the exporter to send to Fluentbit, but to simplify, I added a sidecar collector that will do the job. So that's why you have two containers on most of those workload, one for the app and one for the OpenTelemetry sidecar collector. So now that we have our environment, we already have deployed a pipeline directly in our environment. As a consequence, let's have a look at this one to start. So in this pipeline, what we can see, we are first using tail plugin, so that allows to read files from all the containers that are in our cluster. The second thing, I'm using Kubernetes to add extra metadata, and then I won't go through all this process because at the end we already covered that in the episode dedicated to Fluentbit a couple of months ago. One thing is important is that we use rewrite tag. So just as an example, so you may probably going to use it later on. Read-write tag. The option is here. I'm taking all the logs that are marked with kube.star. And then what I want to do is if the namespace, Kubernetes namespace, is respecting this regular expression, so basically a normal namespace name, I want to rename that tag with modify dot, and then I can use dynamically fields or values of a couple of keys in that log stream. In this case, I want to use the Kubernetes namespace. And then last, I'm using true because I want to keep the data, which means they will have a duplicated stream. One will be under tag kube.star. And then we have other stream with modify dot and the name of the namespace. We're not doing anything with modify. It's just to make a full example. So now that we have that running, let's have a look at the std out. At the moment, we're sending to Dynatrace, but we're also sending to std out. So I'm going to use kubectl get pods. I can see I got the three pods for my 3 nodes, and I'm going to look at the logs of one of them. So I'm pick randomly one of them, and of course in the Fluentbit namespace. So you can see that we are receiving a couple of logs here, and Fluentbit has the advantage of showing us the tag as the beginning. So you can see here we have kube dot, and then what you have at the end is basically the path without the slash, of course, of our log file. So var log containers Fluentbit blah 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 and to log. And if you pay attention to that logs file, we have a stream, we have content because we name message into content, and then just after that content, we will have the various attributes. So Kubernetes pod.name, because we decided to have this naming for the pod name, the Kubernetes namespace, and then we have a couple of labels that comes from the Kubernetes metadata. So, which means at the moment the structure is working as expected. And if I do again, I may see some flush. Here it is. You can see that I have a flush to that is sent to Dynatrace. So I have the feedback that has been well sent to Dynatrace. And other thing that we can see here, because we see the tags at the beginning, we see here that we have a modify. Modify corresponds to our rewrite rule. So we have modify dot, and then this here is the namespace. So at the end, should be the similar stream that we had under cube dot whatever, but here in this particular example with the namespace cube system. Now that we have this, what I want to do is to utilize an expect filter. So to use an expect filter, what I want to do, for example, we just did the modify here in this step where we added the Kubernetes attributes. I want to make sure that, for example, that we have actually a Kubernetes pod name. The key exists. And then the Kubernetes pod namespace also is not null. So for this, I'm going to add a filter. And then, of course, name is going to be for us expect. And now we're going to use match to say where we want to apply this. So in cube.star. And then I can then say key exists. And then we pick our key name. If you want to know a bit more about the various plugins of Fluentbit, in the documentation of Fluentbit, all the plugins structured by input, parser, filter, and so on are available. And here you can see that we have the expect documentations. And the other thing I want to do is to do key value not null. So that's the second rule I want to do. And let's go back to our plugin, and I'm going to add this one. So I'm going to add it just afterward, this one. So key not null. In our case, in this example, it was the Kubernetes namespace. The other thing is, what should that plugin do as action? Error, we will have an error and we will have a crucial app back off or whatever in Kubernetes, but here we just want to throw a warning if we don't have anything. There's plenty of other things. Again, check the documentations. Now that we've done this, obviously, I want to apply this this change to my environment. So I'm going to apply, and then to have the agents picking up this new pipeline, I need to restart my Fluentbit pods, which I'm just doing here. And then I'm looking at the Fluentbit containers. So here, 4 seconds ago, this one has been restarted. So then I can basically start looking at the logs. So because I'm sending at the moment, again, my logs, all the data into std out, all side of Dynatrace. All right, so now we have it and we don't have any warning, so it works fine. So the data is obviously sent to Dynatrace. So where can you expect to see that data in Dynatrace? Well, if you go to dynatrace.com, your tenant, there is a section called logs. So if you click on logs, that will bring you to the log viewer. So this is the log viewer screen. And then you can either filter by typing here things, or advanced, we can use Dynatrace query language. But in this case, what I want to do, I can see that it's also showing us all the attributes available. So here it's Kubernetes. You can see that Kubernetes cluster name is, I didn't change it. So that's why we have this name. We have the Kubernetes pod name, and then I can select one of those. So I can say, oh, I want to look at the example Kafka coming from the OpenTelemetry demo applications. So then I can see that data, all the logs coming through. And if you pick one of the logs, as expected, we have the metadata come from Kubernetes, the versions, the pod, the namespace, and so on. So the data is coming through properly in Dynatrace. So then if I wanted, I can use some Dynatrace query language to query and do some statistics. Just a small teaser. This is the new UI of Dynatrace. And in Dynatrace, you have DQL. So here's an example where I'm saying I'm fetching the logs. I filter only on the key names, Kubernetes namespace equal to hotel demo. I'm also filtering the content to have specific patterns. I can do that, and then you can summarize. So here I'm doing histograms. You can do graphs. You can do a lot of things. So there's plenty of options to visualize the data and do semantics on top of your logs. But again, in your case, if you do a trial, you won't have that UI. You will have this one. So now we want to add metrics. So to add metrics, we're going to use one of the input plugins available that will collect metrics based on the node exporter, but without scrapping it from Prometheus. It's the node exporter metrics. So here, from the interview that we had with Eduardo, it's using the Prometheus stack to do that. So here, I'm getting the metrics. I'm not filtering and taking everything, disk, CPU, memory, and so on. I'm putting a tag hotel.node, and then I'm scrapping it every 2 seconds. Of course, I can even increase it to 5 seconds if you want it, but that's okay. Now that we have those metrics, I couldn't see it in std out, but what could be interesting is to also add the Prometheus exporter. So then our Fluentbit agent becomes a Prometheus exporter. So I'm going to copy the sections in the README file. And here it's the Prometheus exporter. So it says everything with hotel.star. So all the metrics and will be produced here in hotel.star. We will expose on the pod on the port 2021 the various metrics in a Prometheus format. So here let's put Fluentbit. So we're going to add on the fly an extra label on our data. Okay, so now let's apply this on our cluster. And now that it is applied, I need to restart the pod. Here it is. And now we're just going to check that the pods are actually restarted. So now what I want to do is to look at the Prometheus metrics produced. So first, if I want it, I can look at the logs of this specific pod if I want it. And we should have seen now we have this data. Those are metrics because we are sending it as well to the std out. But we initially wanted to do kubectl. So now the port forward is done. So I can open my browser. And here it is. You can see that we have the Fluentbit is observable. We have the node CPU. So all the data that we're collecting are sent back to the network. So that's with using the node exporter. Now that we have this, let's add extra inputs. So let's say I want to scrap data from a specific Prometheus exporter, in our case, the CubeStat metrics. For this, what we have to do now is to add an input. So here, for example, and I'm going to paste this. So here we have the name of our Prometheus exporter, CubeSat metrics. We have the path to reach out to that exporter and the port, and we're going to scrap it every 5 seconds to say. Now that we have this, we can apply it, but before applying it, let's add another input plugin, the one that will expose the Fluentbit metrics. To do that, I simply use the input Fluentbit metrics that will expose the Fluentbit metrics as of that. So here I can see that we are adding it to metrics and here to Fluent. So we have different tags, but still under hotel. Now that we have this, let's apply this in our cluster. So stop this port forward. Again, let's do the port forward, get pods to see where it is. Those have been restarted. So now I can take this one, for example, and apply the similar port forward, but now on a new pod ID. And well, we should have more. So here, for example, here we can see that we have the input records. We have the label that we wanted. So we can see that the Fluentbit filter records all the data of Fluentbit is exposed. And if we scroll down, we have the node metrics. And if we scroll down, we will have the cube config map, pod, and everything. So it's currently collecting those data. So it works fine. Now let's have a look at the OpenTelemetry. So the first, to be able to receive OpenTelemetry, you have adjusted the services and the pod definitions to add the port 4318 corresponding to the OpenTelemetry HTTP OTLP port by default, but of course it could be customizable. But here, what we want to do is to add this one here. So we're adding the input OpenTelemetry. So it's going to be name OpenTelemetry, of course, the plugin. We listen on the port 4318, and we add the tag hotel.hotel. Now that we have this, currently we are sending the metrics to Prometheus. We are going to remove it because now hotel includes traces and so on, so it may have some impact. So what I want to do now is to utilize in the README file, we are going to use the output OpenTelemetry that would send the data, metrics and traces to Dynatrace on the OTLP ingest. There is the log support, but in your tenants that you will have to use, Dynatrace in the production environment doesn't have the OTL logs yet, but it's going to be soon available in production. So be patient. You will also have the log support and use only one output plugin instead of two output plugins. So here it is. So of course, here you will have to replace your tenant with the right naming and the token as well here. So what it says, I'm going to export everything under OpenTelemetry hotel. So that includes metrics and logs, in metrics and traces in our case. This is the metric to send the URI to send the metrics. This one for the traces, and we don't have logs because those logs is under kube.star. We will use a specific header to pass our token, and we use the export above header to send the data. All right, so now that we have this running, let's apply this. So now let's check that the pods are actually being restarted. Everything is running. So we can still check now. We have lots of data. You can see we have lots of metrics here, the logs, mixing. So now it's working. Let's have a look at Dynatrace. So where do you expect to see the data in Dynatrace? So we saw the logs here. Now that we have the logs, we should have services in the Dynatrace perspective. So I can click on services under application and microservices. And now we can see that we have all the OpenTelemetry demo services that is available in this UI. So I can click, for example, on the checkout, or let's say the product catalog, this one. And we can see the data, the response time, the errors and so on. And obviously I can see the various spans, so list of product, for example, and I will be able to get the trace where that specific span were involved. So you can see that we have the front and so on. So the data are obviously going through Fluentbit and send back to Dynatrace, so it's working fine. I did no major transformations on the traces, so that's where Fluentbit makes sense for me. Now for the metrics, we'll have to go to metrics simply, and now that those the metrics is sent in the OpenTelemetry endpoint. So the first we see all the metrics provided by Dynatrace, but if I go to the bottom, I can see all the metrics coming from ingestions perspective. So here we have the nodes, so all the metrics from Node Exporter. So those are coming in. I should also see a couple of metrics related to specific from the hotel demo application. So I don't have metrics in mind, but yeah, the metrics are here. And if I wanted, I can do some dashboarding and so on with the data that is currently available here.
That's it for today's episode, providing a technical tutorials on Fluentbit version 2. As you understood, Fluentbit is not able currently to filter or process our metrics and traces. We can obviously have tried to use the ULA scripts to adjust the various signals, but we wanted to use default and standard plugins. It means that if you're using currently the OpenTelemetry collector to add some sampling decisions like the tail sampling or the head sampling, then you will have to use the OpenTelemetry collector. If you only utilize the OpenTelemetry collector to send your traces and metrics and then just push it to your final observability storage, then Fluentbit will do a great job. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you soon for another episode. Bye.